My name is Simone Marshall, and I was 31 years old the night my father slid a white envelope across the dinner table to my brother. Inside was $55,000 for Darnell's down payment. When I asked about my own plans, my mother folded her napkin and said, "You can rent somewhere, honey. You've always been fine." She said it the way you'd tell a waitress the food was fine. Before I tell you what I did with the next 20 months of my life, something my family never saw coming, let me say this. If you've ever been the one who was always fine, drop a comment and let me know, and please subscribe, because there's a lot more to this story. My brother got a house that night. I got a compliment sharp enough to shave with. And 2 years later, at that same table, on that same tablecloth, my family asked me for something that still takes my breath away when I think about it. To understand that envelope, you need the history behind it. In my family, money moved like water. It flowed downhill, and downhill was always Darnell. He was 4 years older than me, and his whole life came with a rescue package attached. When he totaled his Charger at 19, my parents replaced it. When he dropped out of college junior year, they paid off the loans so it wouldn't follow him around. When his credit card debt hit 5 figures at 27, my mother cashed a certificate of deposit she'd held since her wedding. Nobody ever sat me down and explained the rule, but I learned it the way you learn a stove is hot. Money in our house went to whoever was drowning. I never drowned. I worked summers at a snow cone stand, put myself through nursing school, and took a job in the pediatric intensive care unit at a hospital in Toledo. Night shift, because it paid a differential. 9 years of it. I held other people's babies through the worst nights of their lives, then drove home at 7 a.m. and clipped coupons. My rent was cheap. My car was an 11-year-old Corolla with a little wooden cross hanging off the mirror that came with the car. And here's the part nobody at that dinner table knew. By the night of the envelope, I had $43,500 sitting in a savings account I'd built $400 at a time since I was 22. I never mentioned it. In my family, having money you didn't need was like leaving a porch light on in the daytime. Nobody saw the point. They were about to teach me exactly what the point was. It was a Sunday in March, pot roast night, the good tablecloth with the ivy border. Darnell had been talking for 20 minutes about a house on Birchwood Lane. 4 bedrooms, $265,000, granite countertops. He said granite countertops 3 separate times like it was a spell. He was 35 and between jobs again, consulting, which as far as I could tell meant sleeping until 10. Then my father reached into his jacket and slid the envelope across the tablecloth. $55,000, he said. Your mother and I have been talking. It's from the retirement account. You can't get a start these days without help. My mother had her hands folded like she was in church. Darnell's eyes went wet and he hugged them both, and I sat there with my fork in the air doing arithmetic I couldn't stop. $55,000 was years of my night shifts. I waited for the part where they'd turn to me. I actually waited. Then I heard myself say quietly, "That's great for Darnell. I've been thinking about houses too, actually. Any help for my down payment someday?" The room got a texture to it. My father studied his plate. My mother reached over, patted my hand twice, and said the sentence that built everything that came after. "Oh, honey, you can rent somewhere. You've always been fine." Darnell laughed, not meanly, just easily, the way you laugh when the world agrees with you. Somebody changed the subject to countertops. I ate the rest of my pot roast and said almost nothing. And under that good tablecloth with the ivy border, something in me quietly closed a door and locked it. I drove the 20 minutes back to my apartment above a laundromat where the dryers thumped under my floor until 11 every night and sat down at my kitchen table with a legal pad. Nobody got a venting phone call that night. A decade of hospital work teaches you a sequence. Chart it, fix it, move on. At the top of the pad, I wrote a number, 43,500. Under it, I wrote what I knew, which wasn't much. I knew houses cost money. I knew Toledo was one of the cheapest markets in the country. I knew I was done asking anyone at that table for anything ever again. And the strange thing is, the decision didn't feel hot. It felt like turning off a faucet that had been dripping my whole life. In the morning, I called the credit union I'd banked at since nursing school and asked what someone with my income could borrow. The loan officer, a kind woman named Angela, who chewed gum through the entire call, came back with a figure about $28,000 less than I'd hoped, on account of a nurse's salary being a nurse's salary. Is that enough to buy anything worth owning? I asked. She popped her gum. Depends on whether you're picky. I decided right then the bank's number would be enough, because I would make it enough. I had no idea yet how a person did that. But I knew who would. The answer met on the second Tuesday of every month in a church basement off Chestnut Avenue. The Greater Toledo Real Estate Investors Association. Folding chairs, burnt coffee, a laminated sign-in sheet. I'd found them through the library, where I'd checked out every rental property book they had. All 6. And read them on my breaks between rounds. That first Tuesday, I sat in the back row with my legal pad and understood maybe half of what anyone said. There were flippers, inexpensive boots, a retired school teacher with 14 units, a young reporter who came sometimes to scout stories, and in the corner an old man in a Carhartt jacket who said almost nothing and got treated like a bishop when he did. Otis Reeves, 71 years old, 40 years a landlord, down to his last few buildings, famously unimpressed by everyone. During the break, I introduced myself and told him I wanted to buy a duplex. Live in half, rent the other half. He looked at me the way you look at a parking meter. Everybody wants to be a landlord, he said, until a toilet calls them at 2 a.m. Then he refilled his coffee and walked off. That was the whole conversation. I drove home oddly happy. He hadn't told me it was a bad idea. He'd told me what the price was. And prices were something I understood. I went back every month after that. It took Otis 3 meetings to remember my name. By May, I'd learned the term that would quietly root my whole life, house hacking, and I'd found a listing that smelled, in every sense, like a beginning. Before the beginning, though, I had to survive Darnell's housewarming. 60 people crammed into a 4-bedroom on Birchwood Lane, balloons on the mailbox, my mother giving tours like a docent. Feel this countertop, she kept saying, just feel it. The house was objectively lovely. That's the complicated part nobody warns you about. I didn't hate the house. I hated the arithmetic under it. My Aunt Yolanda found me by the veggie tray and asked, gently, when I was going to settle down and stop renting. Then my mother clinked a glass and gave a toast I have never forgotten. To family, taking care of family. That's what we do. Everyone raised their drinks, including me. I spent the next hour ferrying dirty plates to the kitchen, because at every family event I have ever attended, I somehow end up staffing it. Through the window over Darnell's brand new farmhouse sink, I watched my father show 3 neighbors the garage. I felt like a woman watching a play about a family that looked exactly like hers. That night, back over the laundromat, I found it on the listing site. 11 days on market. A 1926 brick duplex on Foster Street. 1 unit occupied, 1 vacant. Needs TLC, realtor for bring a flashlight. $142,000. I looked at the photos until 2 a.m. The sagging porch, the twin front doors, the good bones under the bad paint. Family takes care of family, my mother had said. I decided to become my own. The numbers on Foster Street worked like this, and I ran them so many times the legal pad went soft. Purchase price $142,000. An FHA loan, the kind first-time buyers use, wanted just 3.5% down if I lived in the property, which came to about $4,970. The occupied unit rented for $825 a month to a longtime tenant named Miss Odessa. My whole payment, taxes and insurance included, would land around $1,105. Rent covers most of the mortgage. I cover the difference and repairs. The house pays me to live in it, more or less. I called my father, not my mother. The retired electrician, the man who could read a breaker panel like sheet music. I told him I was looking at a 2-family on Foster Street and asked if he'd walk it with me Saturday. There was a pause. I could have parked a truck in. Then he said, well, sure, kiddo. Saturday at 10. He sounded glad. He sounded like a man who'd been waiting to be asked something by his daughter and didn't know it. I hung up, grinning like an idiot at a dish towel. Saturday came with rain. At 10:15, my phone buzzed. Darnell's water heater let go, basement's flooding, gotta run over with the shop vac. Rain check, kiddo. A house he'd owned barely a month, and its water heater had already quit. I learned later Darnell had nicked the pressure valve hanging a bike rack. But that morning, all I knew was the arithmetic again. His emergency, my rain check, always in that order. I sat in my Corolla outside the duplex for 1 full minute, watching rain crawl down the windshield. Then I went in alone, because the inspector I'd hired for $400 was already on the porch, and my money spends whether I'm sad or not. His name was Marvin Cole, and he crawled that house like a tick. What he found in the vacant unit's ceiling was knob and tube wiring. Old, pre-war, the kind insurance companies hate. A year earlier, that sentence would have meant nothing to me. But I'd spent every break since March reading, and I knew 3 things standing in that wet basement. It wasn't dangerous if left alone. It would cost about $60 and $200 to remediate, and it was leverage. I wrote the seller a calm letter through my agent and asked for $6,200 off at closing. They countered at $5,000. I said $6,200 or I walk, and I priced the walk into my voice. They took it. My father never asked about the house again. Not out of malice. It just fell out of his head, the way my things always did. I stopped waiting for the follow-up question around week 2. On a Tuesday in June, Angela called and said the underwriter had cleared me. "Congratulations, hun," she said, gumming away. "You're buying a duplex alone," I thought. Every signature of it. Closing took 40 minutes in a title office next to a vape shop, 60-some pages, and I read every one, because nobody was coming to catch my mistakes. The title officer kept glancing at the door and finally asked if we were waiting on anyone. A husband, a parent, a realtor boyfriend. "It's just me," I said. "Good for you," she said, in the voice people use for dogs who can shake. I signed until my hand cramped. Wire transfer, $4,970 down, closing costs, mostly eaten by my knob and tube credit. And then a small brass key on a paper tag was sitting in my palm, and I was a homeowner. And no one on this earth knew except a gum-chewing loan officer and the state of Ohio. I drove straight to Foster Street. The unit was empty and smelled like cat and 1988. I sat on the bare floor of what would be my living room, ate a gas station turkey sandwich, and listened to Miss Odessa's television murmuring through the wall like a heartbeat. I considered calling my mother, sitting cross-legged on someone's old carpet with my keys in my lap. Then I played the call forward, the way I'd learned to in my family. The pause, the well, that seems risky, honey, the pivot within 90 seconds to how Darnell's gutters were doing. My news would be borrowed against, worried over, or worst of all, waved off. So I finished my sandwich and told the empty room instead. "It's ours," I said out loud to the water stains. That was the first key. My family had no idea it existed. They wouldn't have believed the next 3 either. Otis Reeves turned out to be a prophet. 19 days after closing at 2:14 in the morning, my phone rang. It was Miss Odessa, apologetic and dignified, reporting that the toilet was having opinions. I'd just come off shift. I stood in her bathroom in my scrubs at 3 a.m. with a flange wrench I'd bought that week. A phone propped on the sink, playing a repair video at half speed, and I fixed it. Took 2 hours and 1 skinned knuckle. Miss Odessa made me instant coffee and told me the last landlord would have taken a month. That was my education. That first summer, I patched plaster after night shifts, learned that paint is cheap and is a love language, mowed my own lawn with a push mower from an estate sale. And the numbers did exactly what the legal pad promised. Mortgage done $105. Miss Odessa's rent $825. My personal cost of housing that first full month came to $280, less than half what the laundromat apartment had run me. I owned the roof over both our heads. Every dollar the house didn't eat went back into savings, along with every overtime shift the hospital would give me. I kept going to Sunday dinner in Maple Heights, 20 minutes east, and kept my mouth shut. My mother would ask if I was still in that little apartment, and I'd say I'd moved to a place on Foster Street, and she'd say, "That's nice, honey," and refill Darnell's tea. Which suited me fine, right up until the Sunday it didn't. It was late September, and I decided to test the water. Not confess, just test. My mother had spent the appetizer asking me to help Darnell set up a little budget since I was so good with money, and he had property taxes now. I was good with money the way a mule is good with weight, a talent for carrying, never for owning. So between the salad and the roast, I said as evenly as I could, "Actually, I've been looking at property myself. Rentals. I've been studying it for a while." My mother laughed. "Not cruel. That's what I need you to understand. None of it was ever cruel. Cruelty you can at least stand up and fight." She laughed the way you laugh at a child who says she's going to be an astronaut. A soft little puff of air. "On a nurse's salary, honey, the taxes alone. Walter, tell her about Ted's rental, the one with the raccoons." My father dutifully told the raccoon story. Darnell talked about crown molding. The balloon drifted off, unnoticed, over a table of people I loved. And I sat there and made a decision I'd keep for the next year and a half. They had answered my question, and I would not ask it again. In October, at the RIA meeting, I showed Otis Reeves my numbers, actual printed spreadsheets, purchase price, rent roll, 4 months of repair logs. He grunted, sat down, and read every line while the flippers in expensive boots orbited elsewhere. Twice he took out a pencil, crossed out my repair reserve, and wrote a bigger one. "Furnace is from '09, he said. "You're budgeting like it's immortal. It's not." Then he tapped the bottom line and looked at me, actually looked for the first time since April. "You live in the ugly unit," he said. "I do," I said. "You fix your own toilets." I had a video. Something happened in his face that on a different man might have been a smile. From then on, I had a standing seat next to the Carhartt jacket and a running seminar nobody else seemed to want. Capital expenditures, vacancy math. Why you never fall in love with a property that can't pay its own way. Only once did he tell me anything personal. I'd asked carefully if his kids were in the business. He looked at his coffee a while. "Gave my son everything," he said. "First truck, first house, bailed out his restaurant twice. He's 50 now, doesn't return my calls, and I still can't tell you what he's good at." He turned his cup a quarter turn. "Help that never asks you to grow isn't help. I learned that $200,000 too late." Property number 2 found me in October. An estate sale on Larkspur Street. A little 2-bedroom the heirs in Florida wanted gone before the holidays. $80,000 as is. Tenants long moved out. Marvin Cole crawled it and found the skeleton sound. This time the loan was conventional, investment property, 20% down, $16,000, and the rehab budget was $14,000 more, most of which I saved by doing demolition myself. It was during that stretch, buying my 3rd utility knife at the hardware store, that I ran into my brother in the seasonal aisle, loading a $580 pizza oven onto a cart. He was delighted to see me. Darnell was always genuinely delighted to see people. It's his best feature. And talked for 10 minutes straight about how the oven was for entertaining, and entertaining mattered because he was getting into real estate. Him and his buddy Trevon were going to flip a house. He was thinking about a home equity line to fund his share. He said passive income twice. He paid with a card pulled from the back of his wallet, and I caught the name on it. Vivian Marshall. My mother's card. He never once asked what I was doing there in my demolition clothes, drywall dust in my eyebrows, holding a utility knife. I watched him wheel the oven out to his truck and thought, he's gonna get hurt. I found a key rack in the Larkspur cellar, the 2nd week of November, in a box under the stairs. Oak, about the length of my forearm, 4 brass hooks, someone's wood-burned roses from 50 years ago. Most of the estate's leavings went to the curb, but I stood there holding this thing longer than I can explain. That night, I sanded it, rubbed it with butcher block oil, and screwed it to the wall beside my back door. Dead level, because if you're going to make yourself a promise, you should at least use a level. On the first hook, the Foster Street key. On the second, the Larkspur key, shiny from the hardware store that cut it. And then there were 2 empty hooks. I stood there looking at them and heard my mother's voice, clear as the dryers under my old floor. "You've always been fine." That sentence had been handed to me my whole life like a napkin. Something to keep my lap clean while everyone else got served. Standing there smelling of butcher block oil, I decided to take the word literally. If fine was my inheritance, I would compound it. Fine would mean 4. 4 hooks, 4 keys, not $1 of anyone's envelope. I gave myself a deadline out loud, the only witness I trusted, 1 year for the other 2. Here's what the next stretch actually cost, 'cause I don't do montages. I worked 3 12-hour nights a week, picked up a fourth when they begged, and gave Larkspur nearly every daylight hour a body can give. I learned to sleep in 2 shifts. Twice I woke up at dusk in my Corolla, outside the hardware store with sawdust in my hair and no memory of deciding to close my eyes. I missed my college roommate's wedding in Columbus, because the furnace guy could only come Saturday. I mailed a gravy boat and a lie about a work conflict, and she knew it was a lie. That friendship still has a hairline crack in it, I put there myself. The one person who saw any of it was Keisha, who'd worked nights with me for 6 years and could read me like a monitor. She helped me haul a vanity up the Larkspur steps one frozen Sunday, and afterward, sitting on paint buckets eating drive-through, she watched me log the receipt in my binder and asked the question I'd been outrunning since March. "Simone, who exactly are you proving this to?" I said something about compound interest. She let it sit there between us like a dropped instrument. By Christmas week, Larkspur had new floors, a white kitchen, and a tenant, a hospital records clerk, and her daughter. $1,050 a month, lease signed at my kitchen table under the key rack. I remember thinking the hard part was over. It hadn't started introducing itself yet. Thanksgiving that year was at Darnell's, catered by my mother out of coolers, eaten off the granite. Darnell stood to make an announcement over the pie. He and Trevon were officially in business. They'd found a flip house in Brookfield, and Darnell was funding his half with a $35,000 home equity line against Birchwood Lane. The bank had approved it in 9 days. Sweat equity. The course teaches you everything. My parents glowed like a furnace. My mother squeezed his arm and told the table he's always had the vision. My father raised his coffee to real estate men. I sat there holding at that exact moment 2 rental properties, a repair log, and a spreadsheet Otis Reeves had personally corrected, and I said, "Pass the beans." I'm not going to pretend that silence was noble. It had rust in it. But I'd tested the water in September and gotten the raccoon story. And you don't pour good news down a drain twice. Here's the beat I can't shake, though. Leaving in the cold driveway, my father caught my elbow and pressed something into my hand, folded small the way he's folded things my whole life. $50. Gas money, he said, not meeting my eyes. Don't tell your mother. I drove back to Foster Street with that 50 on the passenger seat like it was riding shotgun. A $55,000 envelope for Darnell passed across a tablecloth in front of witnesses. $50 for me, folded into a palm in the dark with instructions to keep it secret. The exchange rate on being fine. I still have the bill. By the way, if this story is holding your attention, this is a good time to hit subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next. In April, on Otis's calendar like everything now was, I refinanced Larkspur. Here's the play in plain English. I'd bought a wreck for $80,000 and spent $14,000 making it whole. About $94,000 all in. Fixed up and rented, the bank's appraiser now valued it at $125,000. The bank would lend me 75% of that new value, $93,750, which paid off the old $62,000 loan and handed me back roughly $22,000 in cash, tax-free, because borrowed money isn't income. My own down payment, most of my rehab money, back in my hands, while the records clerk's rent covered the new payment with room to spare. Investors call it recycling capital. I called it the second wind. In May, I put that recycled money down on property number 3, a brick bungalow on Willow Avenue, $88,000, 1 street over from a hospital shuttle stop, which meant it would never want for tenants. 20% down, $17,600. A traveling respiratory therapist signed at $925 a month before the paint cured. The 3rd key went on the 3rd hook on a Tuesday night in May. 3 keys, 1 empty hook. 20 months since the envelope. Then the phone rang. Otis Reeves, who I had never once heard use a telephone. "Coffee tomorrow. I want to show you something." He took me to a duplex on Magnolia Avenue, 2 blocks off the park. Brick, built 1938, tuck-pointed like a bank vault. Both units rented to long-term tenants who paid like clockwork. We stood on the sidewalk, and he told me the thing he'd been packing up all winter was his life. His daughter in Arizona had a casita and a grandkid he'd met 4 times. His knees were done with basements. He'd sold off the rest of his portfolio quietly to other old RIA men, But this one, his first building ever, he'd been waiting on. Realtor would list it at $148, he said, squinting at the porch. I'll carry it for you at $132. 10% down, 6.5% 20-year note. No bank, no circus, and it's yours. I did the math 3 times, heart going like a code alarm. Why me? I asked, because in my family, gifts had strings attached, and I'd learned to check. Otis looked genuinely offended. It's not a gift, it's a note. You'll pay me every month like anybody. Then, quieter, because you fix your own toilets. But there was a condition. Bring me your books first. All of them, every property, every month. If they're clean, we talk. If they're stories, we don't. I spread my whole financial life across his kitchen table on a Sunday afternoon. 3 binders, bank statements, leases, the repair log with the skin knuckle stains, tax returns, and the legal pad from the night of the envelope, which I included for reasons I didn't examine too closely. He read for 2 hours and 11 minutes, drank 1 glass of buttermilk. Twice he grunted at my vacancy reserve, which I'd learned to pad like a crash cart. When he got to that first page, the 43,500, he stopped the longest, tapped it once with his thumbnail. Didn't ask. Then he closed the last binder, straightened the stack like a deck of cards, and said, Tuesday, my attorney's office, bring the $13,200. That December, 20 months almost to the day after I signed for Foster Street, I closed on the Magnolia duplex at a lawyer's desk with Otis in his funeral and weddings blazer. Afterward, in the parking lot, he shook my hand with both of his. From Otis, that was a ticker tape parade. In January, he moved to Arizona. The 4th key went up on the 4th hook that night, and the rack was full. I sat down on my kitchen floor and cried for about 30 seconds. Hard, ugly, out of nowhere. Then it passed like weather, and I made tea. 4 properties, 6 doors, 20 months. Not one soul at the Maple Heights table knew any of it existed. In February, my phone lit up with a number I didn't know. A woman named Michelle Owens from the Toledo Business Courier said she'd been hearing about me at REIA for a year. Could she buy me a coffee? She thought I was a story. I told her I'd think about it, and then thought about almost nothing else for 3 days. Understand what she was asking. Newsprint gets clipped, mailed, laminated, taped to refrigerators in Maple Heights. My Aunt Yolanda had taken the Courier since 1989. If I said yes, there would be no more choosing my moment, no more deciding who deserved which truth. Everyone would know everything on the same Thursday. I made a list of reasons to decline. Tenant privacy, hospital gossip, relatives with sudden financial emergencies, my mother. Then sat with the other column, which had exactly 1 entry. Keisha's question from the paint buckets. Who exactly are you proving this to? Because here was the ugly little truth I'd been renovating around for 20 months. Some part of me had been building a case file, every key, every ledger line, exhibits for a courtroom where my family would finally file in, review the evidence, and rule that I had been worth backing all along. That courtroom was never going to convene on its own. I could keep collecting evidence in secret forever, or I could stand up on the record, under my own name, and be seen on purpose. Not summoned, not discovered, chosen. I called Michelle back on a Wednesday before night shift. Okay, I said, but every number gets fact-checked. If we're doing this, we're doing it right. She laughed and said I was the first person who'd ever demanded harder journalism about themselves. The photographer came on a Saturday in March and posed me on the Foster Street porch with my arms crossed, apparently the international sign for small business owner. Michelle spent 2 hours at my kitchen table with the binders, checking every figure like she was auditing me, asking questions nobody in my family ever had. What's your vacancy rate? What did the furnace cost? What would you tell a nurse with $10,000 saved? At one point she looked up at the key rack. A promise I kept, I said, and she wrote that down. Meanwhile, that same week, my actual family was on the group chat, and the news wasn't good. You had to read between the lines to see it. My mother called on a Tuesday, ostensibly about Easter, and spent 20 minutes on Darnell. The Brookfield flip still hadn't sold, 8 months on the market. Trevon was being difficult. Carrying costs were a squeeze. She used the phrase, the market's slow, which I happened to know was false. Toledo was having its briskest spring in years. Houses priced right sell. Houses flipped off a weekend course by two men with a pizza oven do not. I asked carefully how Darnell's own mortgage was holding up with all that squeezing. A pause. Fine, honey. Everything's fine. There it was, the family word doing its family work, spackled over something with water damage behind it. The story ran Thursday, page 1 of the business section, above the fold. From rent money to 4 front doors, ICU nurse builds a portfolio in 20 months. There I was in newsprint, arms crossed on my own porch, next to a chart of my numbers, and a pull quote in bold. Nobody was coming to catch my mistakes, so I stopped waiting. By 7 a.m., my phone was a slot machine. Keisha texted a row of exclamation points from the break room, where someone had already taped the article to the refrigerator. Angela from the credit union left a voicemail mostly gum and shrieking. At 9:40, Aunt Yolanda forwarded a photo of the physical page to the family group chat with the caption, "Is this our Simone?" I watched the little dots appear and disappear. Darnell replied with a thumbs up. Reflex. I learned later he hadn't read past the headline. My cousin wrote, "Wait, what?" My father, who joined group chats the way cats join swimming lessons, wrote, "That's her grandfather's brick on that porch." From my mother, who I knew for a fact had her phone in hand because Yolanda confirmed it, nothing. Not that day, not Friday, not through the whole weekend. On the 4th day, Monday, at 8:02 a.m., her name lit up my phone. "Come by the house, please." They were all 3 in the kitchen when I got there, arranged like a tribunal that hadn't agreed on its verdict. The courier lay folded to my face on the counter. My mother didn't offer coffee, which in that house is a weather report. 2 years, she said before I'd gotten my coat off. 2 years you've been sneaking around buying up half of Toledo, letting your own mother find out from Yolanda. You lied to this family. Notice the verb. Not built. Not did. Lied. My father stood by the window holding the paper like it might fly off. Reading it again, moving his lips a little at the numbers, all the way to the bottom, then starting over at the top. He never said a word, but he read my article twice while my mother listed my crimes. "Nobody lied, Mom," I said. "You never asked. Not once in 2 years did anyone at this table ask what I was doing. Because we didn't think we had to worry about you." There it was again. Worry as the only currency of love, and me with my empty account. Then Darnell, leaning on the counter with his arms crossed over a hoodie, said the sentence he will spend the rest of his life wishing he'd phrased differently. He snorted, jerked his chin at the paper. "So what? You finally got yourself a house? Congratulations." The kitchen went very quiet. I looked at my brother, 35 years old, standing in granite he didn't pay for, and felt the last 2 years assemble themselves behind my teeth into one even, unhurried question. Which one? You could hear the refrigerator. Darnell's face did something complicated, the smirk trying to hold while his eyes caught up. My mother actually took a step back and looked at the article again, as if the number 4 might have been a typo she could pray away. I didn't stay long after that. There's a kind of quiet that isn't peace. It's inventory, and I left them to take theirs. The fallout arrived on schedule, exactly the way Otis once told me it would. Print your name next to money, and watch your phone learn new tricks. My cousin needed $1,800 just till taxes. A man from church had a can't-miss storage unit thing. Aunt Yolanda, bless her, just brought me a lasagna and asked for a tour. My mother worked the phones all week. I know because Yolanda reports like a wire service, telling the aunts, in a voice Yolanda described as proud and wounded at the same time. Well, we never had to worry about Simone. That girl always lands on her feet. That's a compliment. There it is. If you want the whole ledger of my childhood in one sentence, even my secret got rebranded as their peace of mind. But Thursday evening, while I was scraping paint off the Foster Street porch rail, my father's truck pulled up. He didn't come in. He stood at the bottom of the steps with his cap in his hands, looked at the brickwork a while, and said, "Your grandfather laid brick on half this street, you know. Rewired most of it, too." He touched the porch post once, like checking a pulse. You've got his hands. Then he got back in the truck. He was gone before I trusted my voice. Darnell came to Foster Street on a Sunday evening alone, which had never once happened in the history of us. He stood in my little kitchen, turning his cap in his hands, our father's gesture apparently hereditary, and looked at the 4 keys on the 4 hooks for a long time. That's them, huh? Then it all came out of him, sitting at my table, in no particular order, like a pocket emptied. He'd lost his real job back in November, the logistics job he'd finally landed. The consulting had been fiction for years. The Brookfield flip was dead weight. Trevon had stopped answering. It had eaten the whole $35,000 home equity line and was listed below what they owed. He was 2.5 payments behind on Birchwood Lane. Our parents knew some of it, not the number. He hadn't been able to say the number out loud in that kitchen with the granite. I keep waiting to feel like a guy who owns a house, he said. It's never once felt like mine. It felt like theirs, and I was house-sitting, and I even screwed that up. He rubbed his face. I don't know how you did any of this. I had a $55,000 head start, and I'm the one drowning. I didn't say the true thing, that the head start was the anchor. It wasn't the night for it. At the door, he stopped. Mom's calling a family meeting Sunday about the houses. My mother beat the meeting by 3 days. She showed up at Foster Street on Thursday with a coffee cake, which in her language is a diplomatic pouch, and asked to see the place. I gave her the tour. She ran her thumb along my window trim, tested the porch rail, said, 11 different ways. In the kitchen, she stopped in front of the key rack and touched the wood-burned roses, and something moved through her face I'd never seen before. My mother had one like this, she said. Then, without sitting down, holding her purse in both hands like a railing, my mother told me a story I had never heard in 31 years. Her father's farm up near Millbrook, 200 acres and a good brick house. When he died, it went all of it to her brother. Gary got the farm because Gary needed the farm. He'd failed at everything else. That's just how it was done, she said. I was 23. Daddy told me, "You've got Walter. You'll be fine." She looked at my key rack while she said his words, and I don't think she heard the echo. And that was the loudest part of the whole afternoon. And I was fine, she said, straightening up. I made my peace. You feed the child who's drowning, Simone. That's not favorites. That's triage. That's what a mother is. For one breath I saw her at 23, standing in a farmhouse kitchen, being handed the same napkin they'd handed me. My anger had to make room for something more complicated, with grief in it. Then she snapped her purse shut, kissed my cheek, and laid the ask on the table on her way out, casual as a coaster. Sunday then. And honey, Darnell is drowning. Bring your checkbook. Sunday, same dining room, same tablecloth, with the ivy border. I'd bet the Willow Avenue bungalow this was deliberate. My mother has never once staged a scene by accident. Pot roast again. My chair was the folding one from the garage, the way it always somehow was. I sat in it and waited through 20 minutes of weather and casserole diplomacy before my mother nodded at my father. He looked older than I'd ever clocked him, and he brought out a manila folder and slid it across the table to me. The mirror was so exact my skin prickled. 2 years ago, almost to the week, an envelope had crossed this same tablecloth going the other direction. We talked to a man at the bank, my mother said, in her church committee voice. A refinance. Folds the equity line back in, gets the payment down to where Darnell can manage while he gets on his feet. But with the late payments and the job situation, they won't do it on his name alone. The folder sat in front of me. Pre-approval worksheets, a co-signer line highlighted in yellow, a ballpoint pen placed beside it gently, like a communion wafer. With your income and your credit, the man says it goes through clean, she said. It's a signature, Simone. It costs you nothing. She reached over and took my hand, eyes wet and absolutely certain. You wanted to be part of this family, honey? This is what family does. This is your moment. The refrigerator hummed. Darnell studied the tablecloth like it might be flipped for profit. $55,000 had bought him a seat at this table forever. 4. They were offering me mine for the price of a signature. I want to walk you through the next 4 minutes, because it's the reason this story exists. First, the nurse in me took vitals out loud evenly. What's the payoff on Birchwood Lane? 2 and 18, about. And the equity line? 35, Darnell said to his plate. How many payments behind? Silence. 2.5. What's the new payment if this goes through, and what's your income right now today? Not the income we're hoping for. Warehouse applications pending. Unemployment till then. My mother watched me ask like I was performing surgery on the table itself. She'd expected tears or a hug, and she was getting an underwriter. Here's what my vitals said. On paper, I could survive signing. That's the truth, and I won't pretend otherwise. If it all went wrong, if Darnell missed and I had to cover his payment to protect my own credit, the credit that held up 4 buildings and 6 leases, it would bleed me slow, but it wouldn't kill me. I could afford to buy their love. For the first time in my life, it was actually for sale, sitting right there next to the gravy, marked down to 1 signature. And then the second thing rose up, quiet, in Otis's flat voice, and Keisha's breakroom voice, and my own voice talking to 2 empty brass hooks. What had I actually built these 20 months? 4 buildings, or 1 long exhibit for a courtroom, where this family would finally rule I'd been worth choosing. Because here was the verdict, arriving early. They would choose me now, tonight. The moment the ink dried, I'd be inside the circle at last. The daughter who saved the house. I looked at that yellow highlighted line, and every number I had said no, and every year of my childhood said sign. I picked up the pen. My mother exhaled, and I set it back down on the far side of the folder. No, I said, not loud, the way you'd read a lab value. I'm not signing, and I'm not writing a check. And before anyone leaves this table, hear the rest, because I'm not done. My mother's mouth had already opened. Something in my tone closed it. I turned to Darnell and talked to him. Only him. The way you'd talk to a family in a hallway at 3 a.m., when the news is bad and the plan matters more than the grief. Here's what I will do, and it's yours if you want it. Every Sunday, you and me, this binder, my kitchen table, we list Birchwood Lane this week. Price to actually sell. Not to save face. We call the bank about the equity line before it goes to collections. There are hardship terms if you get ahead of it, and I know the words to use. We build you a budget you can survive off your real income, the warehouse job, not the story income. And when it sells, I put my hand flat on the folder. You walk away clean. Broken clean. Then if you want it, my Larkspur house turns over in June. $1,050 a month. You'd fill out the application like every other human being on earth. First month and deposit, and if your numbers pass my screening, you sign my standard lease, and I will be the most boring landlord you've ever had. Darnell was staring at me the way you stare at weather on the horizon, trying to tell if it's moving toward you or away. You'd be my tenant, not my charity. You'd pay on the first, and you'd learn what everything costs, which is the one thing. I looked once at the folder, at all that highlighted yellow rescue. Nobody in this family ever let you find out. Somebody told me once, help that never asks you to grow isn't help. I'm offering the kind that asks you to grow. My mother stood up so fast her chair barked on the floor. Simone? Her voice had lost the committee in it. This was another register, higher, cracked at the edges, one I'd only ever heard through walls. He's your brother, not an applicant. Your whole life we fed you, clothed you, raised you. And the first time, this family asks you for one thing. 1 signature. You sit at my table and offer him paperwork. She had the folder in her hand now, shaking it. A sheet slid loose and seesawed to the floor. You've got 4 houses, Simone. 4. And your own brother is drowning. And you, after everything. And there my mother ran out, right at the edge of the thing she'd never once had to say out loud in her life, because until that moment the ledger had always simply been obeyed. I stood up too, not fast. I picked up the fallen sheet, squared it, set it on the table. You're right, Mom. I do have 4 houses, and you never once had to worry about me. I know that's your compliment, so hear mine. I'm fine. I made sure of it myself, because somebody at this table had to be. I said goodnight into a silence with a heartbeat in it. I was 3 steps down the front walk when I heard the storm door. It was my father, hatless in the cold, an old electrician holding the rail. He looked at me for a second that had 31 years pressurized into it. Send Darnell the Sunday Times, he said. That was all he had. It was also, from that particular man on that particular porch, very nearly everything. I nodded. He went back inside to the sound of my mother crying over the casserole dish, and the door shut, and I understood with total clarity that I had just eaten my last pot roast at that table. I drove back to Foster Street with the radio off. I kept waiting for the collapse, The shaking hands, the pullover and sob that 2 years of grinding and one detonated dinner had surely earned. It didn't come. What came instead, standing in my dark kitchen with my coat still on, was the strangest lightness I have ever felt. The street light was doing what it always did to the key rack. 4 brass hooks, 4 shadows up the wall, and I stood there and realized I was looking at keys. That's all. Keys to buildings where the furnaces ran and the rents cleared, and a records clerk's daughter had a bedroom with good light. For 20 months, those hooks had been a courtroom exhibit, a closing argument, a whole trial I was secretly preparing for a jury I now understood would never be seated, because the verdict in Maple Heights had been written before I was born, in a farmhouse kitchen near Millbrook, on the day they handed my mother her napkin. You can't win a case in that courtroom. You can only stop filing. Just before midnight, my phone buzzed once. Darnell, no apology, no speech, none needed. Blunt and somehow perfect. What time Sunday? I stood in my kitchen and laughed until I had to hold the counter. Then I texted back, 9. Bring your bank statements, and hung my car key on the first hook where it fit just fine beside everything else I owned. Here's where everyone ended up because you've earned the accounting. Birchwood Lane listed the following week. Price to sell, over my mother's objections and Darnell's flinching, and closed in June for $268,000. After the mortgage, the equity line, and closing costs, my brother walked away with a little over $5,000 and, for the first time in his adult life, 0 debt. The Brookfield flip sold that same spring for less than Trevon and Darnell owed on it. Darnell's share of the wreckage came to nothing, which he now says out loud at my kitchen table like a man reading his own x-ray. The warehouse job came through. Second shift, forklift certified, benefits. In July, he filled out my rental application at that same table, and I ran his numbers the way I'd run anybody's, and made him wait 2 days for the answer. Keisha says that was petty. Keisha is correct. I regret nothing. He moved into Larkspur with a standard lease and a security deposit he paid himself. 4 months in, I've collected 4 rent checks, every single one early. My brother, it turns out, likes being someone who pays early. Sunday mornings he comes to Foster Street with his binder and his bank statements, and we do the budget. Some Sundays my father's truck is already at the curb when Darnell gets there, because Walter Marshall has decided, without any announcement, that my gutters and porch rails and outlets require his personal supervision. He and Darnell rewired my basement light in October. Took 4 hours and 2 arguments, and I heard my brother laugh down there like he was 12. My mother has not set foot on Foster Street since the coffee cake. We speak at other people's events, politely, like former coworkers. In August, a birthday card came, addressed in her round church bulletin hand, and inside it said Mom. That's all. No note, no verse. The ledger's still open on her side of the table, and I've stopped expecting her to close it because I understand now who handed it to her, and in whose kitchen, and what it cost her to survive believing it was love. The $55,000 is simply gone, absorbed into closing costs in granite and a dead flip. Nobody at any table mentions it. There's a lesson in that silence. I'll let you assemble it yourself. Otis sends postcards from Arizona, with no greeting and no signature, just sentences. The last one said, "Grandkid can swim now, book Stilgar Otis. All 6 doors, cash flowing. Boring as a heartbeat, which is the highest compliment in the business." And that, friends, is where the money went. The rest of what happened isn't about money at all. Last Sunday morning I was on my porch with coffee and the cold gold light. Foster Street does better than any street I own. When Darnell's truck pulled up early, he got out with his binder under his arm and a bag of hardware store donuts, stopped on the walk, looked up at me on the steps my grandfather's brick built, and hollered the old question, the one from the granite kitchen. Except this time, he was grinning when he asked it. "Hey, you home?" I looked through the kitchen window, where 4 brass hooks caught the morning sun. 4 keys hanging there like notes in a cord, plus a car key that has no idea how it earned the neighborhood. And I said it. You know I said it. Which one? My brother laughed and climbed my steps, and we went inside to do the work. Here's the only thing I know for sure after all of it. Being fine was never the consolation prize they told me it was. It was the inheritance I wrote for myself, one key at a time, and nobody gets to slide it across a table and nobody gets to take it back. If you've spent your whole life being the one who was always fine, what would it take for you to stop waiting for the envelope and build your own? Tell me in the comments, I really do want to hear it. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe to our channel so you don't miss the next story. It means a lot to us. I'll see you in the next one.